Good day, brothers and sisters. Thanks again for tuning in to Alex Sass Show here at the Glen Zone with Glenn Herring. Today is probably one of the most important shows that we've ever done. And we're talking constantly in the last few weeks about ESGs. We're talking about the forced behavior. We're talking about all those new trendy things like transgenderism and Pride Month and, climate change. But where's it coming from? What is it about? But it's definitely a point of divisive agenda. We are being divided by those issues, left or right, no pun intended. And we choose different sides. And at the end, we are fighting each other. And we don't actually know who the enemy is. It's not us, brothers and sisters. We are brothers and sisters. We are family. We are united. We need to stay united. And in this show today, we're going to talk about who actually runs the world according to Alex and Glenn. Well, in other sources, we're going to have a lot of videos to show you. Other people do a lot of research. And all this information is available public. So we are going to talk about World Economic Forum and, Klaus Schwab. And we're going to talk about all the puppet, that puppet master has been controlling. But who's enforcing Klaus Schwab? Who is enforcing his behavior? Who is enforcing behavior of Larry Fink? If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, let's watch this video right off the bat, Glenn.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at Blackrock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we're doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behavior.
What behavior he's referring to, brothers and sisters, is something really terrible. We showed it in the last few episodes, and it's really quick. But let's watch this really quick.
Thank you. Can we take a little video?
They try to make this sort of thing acceptable by, introducing it. Look, it's mainstream. It's even in the White House. Look at this degenerate people. But it doesn't even have to go as far as that disgusting thing. But this is another way they enforce behavior.
Addressing the existential threat of climate change in a real way for the first time. It is the existential threat to humanity. It is the existential threat to
besides
humanity.
him.
I hope I have no climate doubters out there.
Be afraid.
Because it's real.
How can you doubt me? It's real. It's coming from my mouth. And you're watching it on mainstream or legacy media. It's real.
What we learned from this COVID crisis,
people born in the background.
We will be applying to the climate crisis, to the housing crisis, to reconciliation, to making sure that everyone has good jobs and careers that carry them through and create opportunities for their kids.
What about this block?
It is what we decide now that will define the rest of humanity.
Remember that kid? What's his name?
Al Gore reincarnated.
Whether we choose to do that or not,
all acting.
If we don't,
her parents are like drama teachers, one-on-one.
Countless of people, and it is already a death sentence to countless of people living on the front lines of the climate crisis today. But the political will is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, right.
We're going to start focusing mainly on climate.
So this is Project Veritas, and they just, we just showing you, brothers and sisters, how it trickles down. You have government officials, and then you have media. Well, media is corporate; it's owned by corporations, and we'll explain the whole pyramidal structure of this thing in a second.
Climate, like global warming, and that's going to be our next it's going to be our focus. Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
So that's like the next
pandemic story that will beat to death. But that one's got longevity. You know what I mean? It's not like there's a definitive ending to the pandemic, or it'll taper off to a point that it's not a problem anymore. climate thing is going to take years. They'll probably be able to.
Brothers and sisters, the truth is always going to come out, and it's cannot be staying hidden forever. And this is the guy from CNN. He admits it. I don't know what's the setting of conversation. I don't know if he's on a date and he really likes the girl, and that's why he's telling her information. But the idea is that we're talking about things, climate change, and why are we talking about it now? Because we covered the whole smoke and fires in Quebec and Canada, and this orange smoke in New York, New Jersey, which was, holding people hostage for only 1 or 2 days, and apparently was supposed to last longer, and something failed. Thank God for that. But that was going to be the next lockdown thing. As you heard Trudeau saying that in his address to the people, we learned a lot from the pandemic, playing gimmick. Glenn, I don't mean to keep you hanging over there. How you doing, my champ?
Doing very, very good. As with the videos you just shown, it's quite obvious that anybody watching that will lose confidence in this democratic voting system that we have. They want to issue top-down control, but that can only be implemented through bottom-up compliance. One of the things I was concerned about was during the scamdemic, how many men were so complicit for this bottom-up compliance. I heard the expression, vax to the max. I saw people with 2 masks on. I saw a guy training in the gym with his mask on and wearing gloves, and I asked him what's going on, and he said, well, you could never be too safe, And so these people now are controlled by fear. Logic goes out the window, and that's how you achieve the bottom-up compliance. You relinquish your authority, your decision-making to the people at the top because decision-making has become too difficult for you. Shame on you.
And excellent point. So it didn't just came overnight. It started as a distraction of the men, right? So they dismantled the men as a foundation of strong society, right? And I don't know, brothers and sisters, do you know how many of you know what ESG means, right? If you've been watching our show, we've talked about it many times, and at this point, you probably know what it is. But ESG is environmental, social, and governance is a framework used to assess an organization's business practices and performance on various sustainability and ethical issues. It also provides a way to measure business risk and opportunities in those areas. In capital markets, some investors use ESG criteria to evaluate companies and help determine the investment plan. So what that is a WOC credit score. So the thing that we just listened to Larry Fink / Larry Fink talk about, that he says we're going to force behaviors. And how do you force behaviors? By implementing those ESG scores. And because some investment companies, let's call it what it is. It's not an investment company. It's the company that owns your company, that owns majority of shares or controlling, packet of shares. And they tell you, okay, if you don't do this, we do that. Or more or less, I actually don't know what the language and interaction that they use in that conversation, but that seems like that's what it is. And those policies implemented for different reasons, including that to devaluation of this organization so they can buy more shares, a control thing. But who stands on top of people like Larry Fink? We know it's people, Larry Fink is part of an organization like World Economic Forum. So is all those fearless leaders like Justin Trudeau and Ardern, that, ex-prime minister of New Zealand, and Chrystia Freeland, finance minister of Canada. And, the list goes on and on and on. But do you guys know what BIS is? Glenn, what is BIS?
That's the central bank of central banks that sits at top of the power mid. That's the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland.
And what's their role? They basically, like you said, that's the central bank of central banks. So they determine the policy for the world, isn't it?
Yeah, using the U.S. Fed note, the American dollar, as the world reserve currency. They're the ones who control who gets what. And they're also in charge of the World Bank and the IMF. These are 2A and 2B in the rankings, and they're both headquartered in, believe it or not, Washington, D.C.
Wow. Okay, so let's get above that. Who's in charge of BIS? Who's the controlling hand in BIS?
Champ, I think this goes back a long time ago. Like in 1913, you had the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. In other words, a private bank that controls the money and the currency supply of a country. And that was under Woodrow Wilson. And that was for, not Rockefeller, but the Rothschild and the Rothschild family dynasties. Rothschild are one of the 12 big families in the world that control things. The heads, all 12 of them are men. They're the heads of the big families. And underneath, there's the 600 subfamilies.
So it's Rothschild. Well, if you had to identify, we don't have to talk about all 12 families, but if you have to identify top 4, what would be your top 4 families?
That's a tough one, champ, because they go under various the different names. You know, like there's also bloodlines. You have the Astor family, Bundy, Collins. DuPont is a name that's recognizable from France, right? Freeman, Kennedy's is another one that's recognizable, and you're going to see something else after. Lee, and the next one associated with the Kennedys is Onassis family, the Greek shipping magnates.
Yes.
Okay. Then you have the Rockefellers, of course, very well known. Russell Van Doyen, the Merovingian, and of course, the one we just said, the Rothschild. But there's also like families that have been around for a long time called the Orsini family. That is a big one. They're part of the Club of Rome. They were people who were influential at controlling the Roman Catholic Church that's been for centuries. And also associated with them, may even be stronger, is the Medici family, who had the same control and also who were interrelated with many bloodlines within the monarchies of Europe at the time.
So do they actually own the bank of the International Bank of Settlements? Like, how does that actually work? Can you explain to me, like, are there shareholders of this? It's impossible to know, right? We just don't know. But they own majority of industries like Rockefellers, right, and Rothschilds. They own a lot of energy industry. So they tied in and control. And we know in this world who controls the energy controls the world, isn't it, Glenn?
A part of it, yeah, or the economies, that's one thing. And who also controls the money supply of the countries, controls that, has an explicit control over the population of those countries.
Well, the direct example of what we're talking about, forced behaviors, if they have the money supply, right? And then they're like, well, they tell people like Target and Anheuser-Busch, like, okay, you have to implement those transgender policies in there or your financial cash flows will be affected. That's what we're referring to, right?
Yeah, and also remember something very important. The people who run your governments, because your governments are the people in government that we supposedly vote for, they're just puppets, and the people who put them into power, we've heard their names, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and all this. But even the Bill Gateses of the world, the Brzezinskis of the world, they're controlled by higher levels. And they do this through, let's say, corporations or non-government organizations. One of the first ones was the League of Nations. That was set up in 1920 and it lasted till 1946, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. But that lost its power, and out of that came the United Nations, and they moved their head office, obviously, to New York. And these United Nations, believe it or not, champ, they were found by the President Roosevelt, Churchill, and Mr. Stalin.
Stalin, yes, right after World War II. You know where they did it? In Crimea.
Look at that.
Actually, I don't know if they might have did it in Sochi. I don't know if they did in Crimea or Sochi, but somewhere they did it on the Black Sea. And I'm glad you mentioned the money supply and how they control it. And cash is the enemy of them. It's really hard for them to trace back the cash. You know, the GM, general manager of BIS, international, the Bank of International Settlement, you know what he said about CBDCs and how important it is for them to implement? He said it 3 years ago.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC,
and it's none of your business.
The central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that.
He didn't just say control. He said absolute control and technology to enforce that. And why is this important? Why is this important? Well, let's not beat around the bush. Let's get straight to this lady.
The biggest fear that the World Economic Forum has is that there are going to be people that will not comply. Their biggest fear is your fight for freedom. Their biggest fear is that you will make individual decisions for yourself and you will not follow.
And it's harder to take individual decisions for yourself if you're, as we've witnessed in a trucker protest, when your banks are being seized by the government. You know, a lot of people are dependent on the economy of, that we have, form of economy that we have here, which is heavily tied into your electronic banking system now.
Their orders. So this digital stuff is absolutely key, because without it, they can't enforce anything. Without it, they can't mandate that you do something. Without it, they can't control your life. So I don't care if you're talking about carbon emissions and what's safe and effective as far as they are concerned. I don't care if they're talking about an experimental injection, a series of injections, whatever they may be, and what's safe and effective as far as they're concerned. This is not about those individual things. This is about the desire to control you from the outside in. And if they have a digital process whereby they can restrict your movement, your behavior, and your decisions with the click of a button, you are done. You're done. Biggest fear that the world...
And they're doing it already. They're doing it already. And an example that we saw in the previous video when British flag is being removed and replaced by a transgender flag or pride flag. And that decision is the guy's like, I know I'm doing the wrong thing, but I'm doing it because I want to get paid. Okay, let's listen more of the stuff.
You actually read their literature. What is a global citizen? It's somebody, I kid you not, I make no joke. They say this themselves. It's somebody who supports the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations Agenda 2030. That's a global citizen.
That's the
failed League of Nations, now they call the United Nations. That's another one of these non-government organizations. Just like the Club of Rome, founded in 1968 in Zurich, Switzerland. Switzerland, was known as a banking capital, and he who controls the money supply controls everything. And they have 100 members. And then you had in 1973 the Trilateral Commission, a non-government organization, again, for closer cooperation with North America, Europe, and the Asian Pacific region. And that was founded and funded by Rockefeller, Brzezinski, and President Jimmy Carter.
Oh, wow. I knew he wasn't so innocent, and that's one of the reasons. What did Barack found? That's my question. But what we're talking about here is forced behavior. What this gentleman is talking about is forced behavior. Let's listen to this.
And they say, what are the rights of a global citizen? This is in a book about global citizenship education published 2 years ago. What are the rights of a global citizen? And the answer, one paragraph later, is We're not that interested in rights with global citizenship. It's more about global responsibilities.
Control.
In other words, slavery. If you actually read...
Right? And that's what we talk about here in Canada specifically. It's like, well, you're not playing alone. You're not being a conscious citizen if you don't surrender your rights. They're doing the same thing in Ireland, by the way. Actually, Ireland may be even worse. So did you listen to this?
When you think about it, all law, all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. That's exactly what we're doing here, is we are restricting.
So all of it is evil. All of the legislature put before by, the government is evil because it's there to restrict your freedoms. And face it, there are no freedoms in the Western world because there are so many laws.
Yeah, lockdowns and vaccine passports, they're restriction of your freedoms too, right? So get people used to what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, 15-minute cities, that's what they're preparing us for.
Freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. You will see throughout our Constitution, yes, you have rights.
You sounded like Sith Lord from Star Wars.
But they are restricted for the common good. Everything needs to be balanced. And if your views on other people's identities go to make their lives unsafe, insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace, then I believe that it is our job.
Right now, you making me uncomfortable, insecure, and I cannot live in peace till you're gone from whatever position you're holding and you held accountable for this crap. Is she going to be held accountable for this crap?
As legislators, to restrict those freedoms for the common good.
Glenn, anytime you restrict your freedom for a common good, you become what? Didn't the people, yeah, but didn't like people like Hitler and Stalin and Mao, they all use that kind of phrase?
Yeah, you become dispendable, not dependable, dispendable.
Good news is that people start to push back, and I think one of the first things, guys, I know you guys have memory better than a goldfish. Remember Snowden, who also now is a Russian citizen, residing in Russia because he has to, because he didn't want to be Assanged, right?
Assange, good one, brother.
Let's listen.
I think that, when Snowden released, nobody in our country knew about that the intelligence agencies were mining all of our data and spying on Americans.
Members of Congress didn't know. I remember members of Congress calling me and saying, tell me what's going on. I have not in the Intelligence Committee and I haven't heard this.
Yeah, and Congress then went and acted on what he told them to change the rules. Oh, how are you making this guy a criminal? He's an American hero. Yeah, I'm going to pardon those guys, up front. I mean, I'm going to look at their cases. Assange, I'm going to pardon on day one.
That was part of the Patriot Act, an extension of the Patriot Act that came into effect after the downing of the buildings on 9/11, which was self-induced to be able to push this agenda through. There's other things you may hear, other names you might hear once in a while, like the Bilderbergs. Mm-hmm. They have a meeting every year in different places. The World Economic Forum. There's, you can go on their website and you look at their members and you could see, Justin Trudeau's name, Chrystia Freeland, Jagmeet Singh. And now you say, well, look at that. All those three people, they're running the government with the Liberals and the coalition with the NDP under Jagmeet Singh. And now they're starting to be challenged. There's going to be some changes coming, but we have to be aware that these organizations are exponentially well-funded. Nobody knows how many Federal Reserve fiat notes, aka also known as US dollars, have been printed into existence. Okay, they give you a number, but that could be the truth could be 2 or 3 times higher than that. Now, the world still believes that this paper note has value. So while it still has value, these non-government organizations can have influence on your government, your heads of industry, Hollywood people. They control things. So I'm saying this only happens with bottom-up compliance. But if the Average people, if Mr. and Mrs. Average or just every normal citizen who wants a good life for themselves becomes aware of this, then you take away the power from top-down control.
One of the digital controls that they try to implement, which they did in Canada, is Bill C11, right? That's a digital control. Look into it. We did an episode on C11. And Restrict Act is, by the way, you mentioned the Patriot Act, the Restrict Act that they're trying to push in U.S. is similar to C11, by the way, the same language. They call it Patriot Act 2.0 for a reason. But people start to push back. I'm glad you're saying this. Ordinary people start to take positions in the government. Do you know about Victoria Spartz? She is a congresswoman from Indiana, 5th District, Congressional District. And she's a Republican, and she was born in Soviet Union. But if you listen to Wikipedia, she was born in Ukraine, then being a part of Soviet Union, right? So the language is important. Everything you read steers you in a way to have a perception of things, right? So let's watch how she pushes back, because she would know, because she grew up in Soviet Union.
Drive everyone a bike and you're driving a bike, I respect you. But if you're flying big jet fuel jets and you want me to ride a bike, well, screw you. You know, you're not going to tell me what to do. You know, this is wrong. You know, you have no power to do that. And these big companies have no right to tell us what to do. And I think we as legislators need to think about it, who we're representing, because these agencies do not represent with the people. They represent big special interest group. People rotate between them. They're getting jobs and lobbying and careers and all of these different companies, and they're promulgating these rules to benefit large special interest groups. And now they are becoming so powerful that everyone is afraid to challenge them. You know, and I think if we are not going to go back and think, what are we doing here? We're going to destroy our country, how it is known and how it was set up. And it is very, very dangerous. So our branch has to get our act together and start doing our job and not be afraid of administrative state, not be afraid of large corporation and big money that coming from all directions, but we actually remember that this republic is set up in being the greatest republic in the history of the world for only reason. There is no difference between the people, because the people have the most power and freedoms. And if we take these freedoms away from we the people, we're going to unfortunately abandon and betray all the people who die for our freedoms. I yield back.
Remember that.
Alas, we see the implementation of the Canadian carbon tax. I said this, they were going to find a way to indirectly tax the air that you breathe. Let's tax the big corporations, the industries, and they will pass on this expense to the people.
Well, you're absolutely right. And what I like about Victoria Spartz, what she said was important, that she says, we got to stop being afraid. And I know, Glenn, you always say that we speak out loud what other people are thinking. From this point on, we want to lead by example and tell you, don't be afraid. We're not the only ones. We're definitely not the pioneers. We're definitely not even the first wave, but we're catching the wave of people being not afraid anymore. Don't be afraid, brothers and sisters. Speak up the truth, your truth, whatever the truth is. If you don't have to agree or comply with any of this degenerate transgender stuff and, tax my air, tax everything, the 15-minute cities, all of that stuff is just to control you and to enslave you. And the only way we're going to change this is one person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time, one country at a time. You're not the only ones. It seems very bad, but it's a lot worse in the West than it is in the rest of the world. And the West is they're trying to destroy the West for that reason, because it has been a powerful community for a long time. Glenn, isn't it true?
Yeah, United States is still considered the leader of the free world. So that was the, they call it secret societies, but they're not that secret. I would call them not secret societies, but societies of secrets. But they're out there. You can see it in what's happening, like in Canada, United States, the Anglo-American Empire. all these things that's top-down control, bottom-up compliance, you see it happening in real time. My brothers, it's time to open your eyes. Stop being distracted with minion crap, and you were put on this planet, on this earth for a reason, okay? Have to realize what's going on, and when you do that, then you will not be complicit on what has been going on. We will unite, right the wrongs, and take back our own sovereignty at the individual level.
Amazing. That's a good advice. And actually, this was an amazing show. And there's a lot more we can talk about. There's a lot more information that's impossible to cover in such a short span. And I know because you're listening to the show, most likely you're already aware of this. But please share this. Share with the people that are not aware of this yet. They're not understanding why this whole transgender and climate change thing is happening. Why this whole, forced behavior thing is happening. Why the CBDCs are coming. Why the 15-minute cities are coming. Why you're being enslaved and by who. And by who is an interesting question. Like in the last episode when we considered, that we did about saving your children. And basically, the Church of Satan says this is part of the religion, transgenderism. They don't even deny it. So I have an interesting question. Like, who runs the Rothschilds of the world and Rockefellers, Glenn?
Well, it's funny you said who, WHO. I can tell you it's not the World Health Organization in that little munchkin Fauci group and Bill Gates. The Bill Gateses of the world, they're the ones we see to keep the real controllers oblivious to us. We will not see them.
But who's even above them? That's the thing. Like, I have this video on Klaus Schwab. Let's watch this. It's a short video.
Under the new rules provided by the COVID-19 emergency, many other elected leaders were empowered to show their true colors. Interesting how they all marched in perfect lockstep while chanting the same slogans.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity.
Here we are now with an economy in crisis, but with an incredible opportunity.
It's certainly a major crisis, but it also offers us a unique opportunity.
Unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset.
The great opportunity for reset. Opportunity for us to reset.
For a reset.
Reset.
It's almost as if they all attended the same school of thought and studied under the same professor.
This is why they're so afraid of the Trumps, of the Pierre Poilievres.
But also look what they're wearing.
And the Putins of the world.
Look what they're wearing. That's the, it's, like symbolism will be the end. That is, they do look like Sith Lords from the Star Wars.
This revolution is characterized by the fight of robots against human beings.
And wow. Okay, let's finish that sentence.
And we will win this fight.
He said this is the fight. Brothers and sisters, he said this is the fight between robots and human beings. I don't know how to fake his accent right now. Can you do the German accent, Glenn?
No, but maybe he's a robot too.
Well, that's the point. He said, and we're going to win this fight. He didn't say if he's the human or the robot. So there's, if you watch some of our perception stuff on like 1984 and Matrix, we talk about that possibly, if it is a simulation, but we argue it is simulation created by creator. But let's say if you devalue creator and you take away God and say, well, it's a simulation by AI, it's not that far-fetched that he is the AI, right? He is the robot thing running this thing, that soulless thing where they can sacrifice people. And that's what they're doing with this transgender ideology, they're sacrificing children and the people. Glenn, that's a good point. Let's finish this.
Professor Klaus Schwab was born in 1938 in Ravensburg, Germany, where Nazi crimes against humanity were committed. His father, Eugene Wilhelm Schwab, was the managing director of Escher Weiss Ravensburg, a company that used slave labor to manufacture weapons of war for the Third Reich. While Klaus's father was at the helm, the Nazi Party awarded Escher Weiss Ravensburg the title of National Socialist Model Company. Years later, Klaus Schwab joined the board of directors at Escher Weiss Ravensburg, where he played a key role in the development of South Africa's nuclear weapons program during the darkest years of the racist apartheid regime. Today, Klaus Schwab is the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum.
It all looks like devil worshipping to me, like with all of the outfits and the symbolism and what do they call it, rituals, like how they giving each other medals and all that stuff. It's pretty sickening. What do you think Freemasons fit into this, Glenn?
That's a difficult question. I know a lot of them that are actually very good people. The only thing is in their brothership is they're not allowed to talk negatively about somebody else in the brothership, which weakens the brothership, like puts them at a disadvantage, if you may say.
Makes me believe you're a Freemason, what you just said. But here, I'm not here to put you on the spot. Do you have
Good
any
luck, brother. What I'd like to say is kudos to people like Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate, Patrick Bet-David, the Alex Saz Show. These are people who are coming out against the Matrix. We're exposing things that most people don't know of, and the people who do know of these things, a lot of them are afraid. So they're the ones who tell us that we say what they're thinking, but they're a little bit apprehensive about joining us against the Matrix.
Because they're not sure if they're a majority. You are the majority, brothers and sisters. So let's just finalize this video with a short overview, everything we talked about today.
Who is this guy, Klaus Schwab, one more time, and what are they really up to?
Yeah, so founded the WEF, the World Economic Forum. And I think it's important to understand, too, like where we're at in the world, right, where this peak centralization, central planning. I like to say central planning always fails. And
by the way, central planning was the communist term. That's what they use all the time.
Nah, because they don't have enough data. They know they don't have enough data. You can't organize billions of people, right? But they're trying to. And so central planning, so it's World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization.
Fauci?
Yeah. World Meteorological Association. And then, the UN, the IMF, the BIS.
What's the BIS?
So that's the
Bank of International Settlements.
The Bank of International Settlements, that nobody knows what the BIS is. And the BIS.
It's the central bank.
The central bank of central banks, exactly. And so if you look at an org chart, I have in a presentation I gave at George's conference, I had that org chart of the way I see the world. And on the org chart, the BIS sits at the top. Below the BIS, then you have some of these think tanks. So the World Economic Forum is one of them, the Club of Rome. And so they're the policy makers. And then they push it down to the next row in the org chart to the policy enforcers, which are the governments. And so the government a few levels down. So it's really a coup of the bankers. And they use this banker, the BIS at the top, push these ideas through the think tanks and then down to the policy enforcers. And then we're down at the bottom of the subjects of all that, right? And so Klaus is kind of running this. He's sitting on top of the world, hobnobbing with all these people, flying their private jets over to Davos, telling us that we need to cut back on our energy.
The only thing I would change about this, brothers and sisters, it's not the governments who public enforces, and we did an episode on that with the World Economic Forum, and it's the corporations. Corporations now have a lot more power than the governments. Just like you said, they have a lot more bank power than the governments themselves. And some corporations' revenues are a lot bigger than some of the countries' GDPs, right? Glenn, do you want to finish the show?
Yeah, Trump. Real men, they don't get indoctrinated. They look at history. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme, so they learn. A real man learns from his mistakes to make himself a better man. There's no such thing as the perfect man, but a good man is a man who always tries to make himself better tomorrow than what he was today or yesterday. And these type of men, they stand on their own 2 feet, no matter what happens. They start by leading themselves. Through leading themselves, then other men who are not at that level yet will recognize these qualities that they would like to have in themselves, and they learn from people like us, for example. Specifically here, the G-Man, who's going to be starting his own man channel coming up in a couple of weeks for mentorship and motivation for the modern man. And this is something that we're going to create to provide and make a movement of real men to embrace their positions, once again, that they were born into and should be appreciated, of given the chance by the Creator to prove themselves in these positions.
Thank you, Glenn, for being one of those people that I look up to, that being as a mentor of mine and mentor of many other men.
Thank you, brother.
That I know of. And looking forward to your channel, looking forward to your program. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for tuning in. Please share the crap out of this program. This was a good one. And I know you're aware of this, but not all of our brothers and sisters are aware of this. So share it. We love you. Go to the gym, go to the church, read the Bible, say something nice to a stranger, smile. And if you have a family and you're a family man, that's your first duty. Your first duty is to the family. If you cannot be a leader in your family, you're not a leader anywhere. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Respect.
We'll see you in the next one.